Remember when the weirdest family on television made dark jokes feel like perfectly reasonable household arrangements? Well, premiering on ABC in 1964 and running for 2 seasons, the Addams Family introduced audiences to Gomez and Morticia Addams, played by John Astin and Carolyn Jones, a couple passionately in love. Alongside them were their children Wednesday, played by Lisa Loring, and Pugsley, played by Ken Weatherwax. Rounding out the cast were the towering butler Lurch, brought to life by Ted Cassidy, and Uncle Fester, played by Jackie Coogan. What aired on screen was strange enough, but what happened behind the scenes, that was somehow even stranger. And today we're going to count down 15 weird facts about the Addams Family that you probably never knew. And stick around for number 1, because becoming Morticia was a 2-hour ordeal every single morning, and the dress was the worst part. But before we jump in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. It helps YouTube show this to more retro TV fans just like you. All right, let's head into the mansion. Number 15. The real Victorian ended up as a parking lot. Now that crooked, towering mansion from the opening credits, the one that looked like it actively discouraged visitors, that wasn't what you might expect. It was a real Victorian house sitting at 21 Chester Place in Los Angeles. The pilot episode actually used it. Real location, real exterior, no tricks. The house did the work entirely on its own, which made sense. It had been looking unsettling long before a camera crew showed up. After that first episode, the production moved on. Filming on location is pretty expensive and unpredictable, so the art department took over with a matte painting, a heavily altered image that added a 3rd floor, threw in a Gothic tower, and produced something that looked like it actively repelled sunlight. Most viewers never noticed the switch. The porch alone told a different story if you look closely enough, but nobody was really looking that closely. Then, real life delivered its own plot twist. The actual mansion was demolished in 1967 to make room for a school track and parking lot. The only thing left on the property today is a decorative 6-globe street lamp. Number 14. The Addams Family helped change Hollywood. For good. Before the bald head, before the bowler hat, before Uncle Fester was lighting bulbs with his mouth on a network sitcom, Jackie Coogan was one of the biggest child stars Hollywood had ever produced. After starring alongside Charlie Chaplin in 1921's The Kid, Coogan became one of the first true child superstars, earning millions at a time when that kind of money reshaped everything around it. Then he grew up, he gained control of his finances, and discovered that almost nothing was left. His mother and stepfather had spent nearly all of it. Furs, jewelry, luxury items. And the part that turned a personal disaster into a national scandal, it was entirely legal. Child actors didn't own their earnings. Their parents did. Every dollar Coogan had made as a kid belonged under the law to someone else. So he sued in 1938, but after legal expenses, he only recovered just $126,000 of the $250,000 remaining of his earnings. And that was out of an estimated $4 million. The rest was gone. The public outrage that followed handed Hollywood an uncomfortable reckoning about how it treated the youngest people that it profited from. California responded in 1939 with the Coogan Law, though the version with real teeth came later, after years of closing loopholes. As it stands today, a child actor's employer is required to set aside 15% of their earnings in a protected trust, a Coogan account, accessible only to the child upon reaching adulthood. Number 13. Gomez was almost Lurch. John Astin didn't walk into the Addams Family audition to play Gomez. He walked in to play Lurch, the slow-moving, silent, deeply unbothered butler who communicated primarily through posture and mild disapproval. Now take a moment with that. John Astin, a man who performs like someone left the accelerator on and removed the brakes, auditioning for a character whose entire personality was standing still and saying nothing. Producers figured out the mismatch almost immediately, so instead of sending him home, creator and producer David Levy made a smarter call. Wrong role, but the right actor. Hand him Gomez instead. The character wasn't fully defined yet, which turned out to be the best possible solution. Levy gave Astin free rein, and he built it from the ground up. That manic energy, the rapid-fire delivery, and the borderline explosive devotion to Morticia, none of it was locked in beforehand. He brought it all himself. The contrast that resulted was exactly what the show needed. Gomez was loud, fast, and operating at a frequency slightly dangerous to nearby objects. Lurch, slow, silent, and moving like he had nowhere to be and no strong feelings about that. Number 12. Lurch had no lines until he decided otherwise. When Ted Cassidy was cast as Lurch, the character had exactly one job: stand there, be enormous, and say nothing. Lurch was written as a silent presence, a background fixture who showed up when summoned and disappeared back into the shadows without contributing a syllable. That lasted until the pilot. The family rang the gong. Lurch appeared, and Cassidy made a split-second decision to open his mouth. What came out were 2 words: You rang. I can't even get my voice that low, but it was delivered in a voice that sounded like it had originated somewhere deep underground and had taken its sweet time getting to the surface. The room broke. Crew, producers, everyone. It was immediately obvious that keeping that voice silent for an entire series would have been a genuine waste. The writers rewrote the character on the spot. Lurch went from silent prop to one of the show's most distinctive presences. 2 completely improvised words, and Lurch never went back to being wallpaper again. Number 11. The family pet required a safety protocol. The Addams family's pet lion, Kitty Cat, was a very real retired circus lion, brought onto a network sitcom set like that was a completely standard production decision. A trainer was on set at all times, which is the kind of sentence that sounds really reassuring until you remember that the reason you need a full-time trainer on a sitcom set is that, oh wait, there's a lion on the sitcom set. Child actors Lisa Loring and Ken Weatherwax, Wednesday and Pugsley were banned from the set entirely whenever the lion was present. The rule was simply, you're not coming in today. And here's the part that makes all of that even better. Most of what audiences actually saw on the screen was stock footage. The same shots of the lion walking down the stairs or growling at the camera cycled through episode after episode. The most high-maintenance cast member also had the smallest actual workload. Kitty Cat was, in every sense, a natural fit for the Addams household. Number 10. The most recognizable theme on TV was made for almost nothing. The finger-snapping theme sounds like a full group performance, right? A chorus of voices that are locked in perfectly eerie harmony. But it was sung by just one guy. Composer Vic Mizzy walked into the studio and discovered that the production company, Filmways, wouldn't pay for backup singers. So he did the logical thing. He recorded himself, and then recorded himself again, and then recorded himself 2 times more, layering 4 versions of his own voice until he had a choir built entirely out of just stubbornness and overdubs. Ted Cassidy handled the deadpan interjectors. Neat, sweet, petite, dropping in like a human bass line with a voice that sounded like it originated somewhere beneath the floorboards. The harpsichord was a deliberate choice, too. An instrument that carries that specific energy of a castle where no one has been cheerful since the 1700s. And those finger snaps weren't just a studio addition. Mizzy went to the set himself and directed the entire cast on how exactly to perform them for the opening credits. He had specific ideas about how he wanted each actor to do it. Gomez and Morticia were supposed to look completely unbothered while snapping, which honestly is the most in-character direction ever given on a television set. Filmway's refusal to pay for backup singers accidentally made the whole thing better. Mizzy liked to say that the theme earned him a house in Bel Air. Number 9. The creepiest house on TV was actually pink. That Addams Family mansion looked like it had been dipped in shadows and aged cobwebs. But in reality, it was pink. Black and white television had a specific problem. Dark colors collapsed into each other on camera. So blacks would swallow detail, browns would turn into visual soup. So the art department built a haunted house using pink walls, red tones, and turquoise, a color palette that Morticia Addams would have set on fire. But on screen, it read as a rich, shadowy, and just perfect eerie combination. The cast was part of the illusion, too. Makeup artists would use green, purple, and brown tones to keep faces from washing out under studio lights. Morticia looked effortlessly pale and elegant on your TV while wearing makeup that, in person, would probably stop a conversation cold. And the mansion wasn't even built from scratch. Parts of the set were recycled straight from the 1964 film The Unsinkable Molly Brown. MGM rated its own storage for anything that looked remotely unsettling. Old props, repurposed furniture, random taxidermy. If it had the right vibe, it got thrown in. The creepiest home in 1960s TV was built entirely on the premise that nobody would ever find out, which, for 60 years, was completely true. Number 8. The characters didn't have names until the very last minute. Gomez, Morticia, Wednesday, Pugsley, some of the most recognizable names in television history, and none of them existed until someone had to sit down and invent them. Charles Addams spent decades drawing this family for The New Yorker without giving any of them a name. Just strange, gothic, and vaguely unsettling, and of course entirely anonymous too. One-panel comics didn't require introduction, so nobody got one. But that changed in stages. Morticia and Wednesday were actually named first, for a licensed doll collection released in 1962. Morticia came straight from Mortician. Obviously, subtlety was never part of the brief. Wednesday was lifted from the nursery rhyme. Wednesday's child is full of woe, which explains the entire character in like 5 words. Gomez and Pugsley had to wait until the show itself was in development 2 years later. Now for Gomez, Addams had a strong preference. Repelli, as in repellent. The final call went to John Astin, though, who took one look at the 2 options and made the correct decision. Pugsley was originally going to be Pubert, but ABC censors killed that immediately. Even the last name was an accident. Addams was just the creator's signature on the original cartoons. It became the family name because the show, it needed a title. Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this, hit that like button. It tells YouTube that there are still people out there who think a family with a pet lion and a hand in a box counts as comfort television. And subscribe if you haven't already. And also, while you're there, drop a comment with your favorite Addams Family character. All right, let's get back to the countdown. Number 7. One actor secretly played 2 characters and messed with the audience while doing it. Now, Thing was already one of the strangest creative decisions in 1960s television. A disembodied hand living in boxes and wall compartments, treated by the entire Addams household as a perfectly reasonable domestic arrangement. And then Ted Cassidy decided to make it weirder. Thing started the series right-handed. Then, quietly without any explanation, Cassidy started switching. Right hand, left hand, back again, just to see if anyone in the viewing audience was paying close enough attention to catch it. Now, most weren't. The ones who did apparently just accepted it, which says a lot about the kind of show that this was. The logistics of performing Thing were already absurd enough. Now, Cassidy was 6'9", which meant that every appearance required him to lie flat on his back underneath the set on a wheeled platform, reaching his arm up through hidden compartments in the furniture. And while he was down there, he figured, well, he may as well run a quiet little experiment on the audience. When scenes required both Lurch and Thing on screen simultaneously, Cassidy couldn't be in 2 places at once, so a stand-in performed the hand. Thing was mysterious by design, and it turns out that he was inconsistent by design just as well. Number 6. The show existed because of a race against a rival network. In 1964, 2 different networks independently decided that what America needed was a sitcom about a creepy family living among normal people, and neither one found out about the other one until it was too late to do anything sensible. ABC had the Addams Family in development. CBS had the Munsters. Same basic concept, 2 different networks, and suddenly everyone was moving faster than they'd originally planned. ABC pushed hard to get their version on air first, and it barely worked. The Addams Family premiered on September 18th of 1964. The Munsters followed 6 days later. Now, both shows did find audiences. Both shows became recognizable almost immediately, but the similarities on the surface masked a pretty fundamental difference in execution. The Munsters were classic movie monsters trying to pass as ordinary Americans and failing completely. The Addams Family were wealthy eccentrics who were entirely comfortable with themselves and genuinely had no idea that anyone found them unusual. One show was about fitting in, and the other was about a family that was too self-assured to notice that they didn't. In the ratings battle, the Munsters pulled ahead, not by much, but consistently enough to matter. Then, Batman arrived in January of 1966, scheduled directly opposite the Munsters on Thursday nights, and the ratings for CBS's Monster Family collapsed almost immediately. The Addams Family, airing on a different night, was already struggling on its own, and the networks had seen enough. Both spooky family shows were gone within months of each other. The genre was over. Number 5. Cousin It was one lit cigarette away from disaster. Cousin It was a pile of hair, a bowler hat, and a pair of sunglasses, and somehow one of the most memorable characters on the show. Now, what the audience didn't know was that the costume was one lit cigarette away from a very different kind of episode. The original Cousin It suit was made from real human hair, heavy and completely flammable, worn by 3'11" actor Felix Silla on set where, this being the 1960s, practically everyone smoked between takes. As Silla himself described, the crew would drop their cigarette butts and just step on them. Producers looked at the situation, they looked at the hair suit, and then made the call. We gotta switch to synthetic fire-retardant materials before something irreversible happened on camera. The new costume fixed the flammability issue and kept everything else miserable. Still heavy, still suffocatingly hot, and Silla spent every scene navigating the set almost entirely blind, buried under layers of synthetic hair, hoping that the next thing that he walked into was his mark and not a wall. His only instructions were to walk around the set. Cousin It's voice was added by a sound engineer in post-production, so Silla wasn't even responsible for that part. In the show, Cousin It effortlessly delivers complete nonsense with total confidence and stole scenes without a visible face. Number 4, The Wednesday You Know didn't exist until 1991. Wednesday Addams, deadpan, morbid, and possessed of a quiet certainty that the world was disappointing and she'd already accounted for it, well, that version of Wednesday is from 1991. The original was completely different. In the 1964 series, Lisa Loring played Wednesday as a genuinely sweet, warm-hearted little girl. She'd smile and dance. She taught Lurch to be groovy. She kept a pet spider named Homer and cheerfully helped a school superintendent find her father in the very first episode. Outside of her braids, her black dress, and a fondness for spiders and decapitated dolls, she was largely interchangeable with every other kid on television that year. The Addams Family itself described her as a solemn child, but solemn was doing a lot of heavy lifting. She was, by any reasonable measure, a perfectly pleasant 6-year-old who just happened to live in a very strange house and had no strong feelings about that. Then came the 1991 film and Christina Ricci, and Wednesday Addams became someone else. Cold, calculating, deadpan in a way that suggested she'd considered multiple outcomes and found all of them equally disappointing. That version of the character was so compelling that every Wednesday since has been built from Ricci's blueprint, including Jenna Ortega's take in the Netflix series. Ortega has said that she specifically studied Loring's performance for inspiration, which is a genuinely sweet deal given how far the character traveled from where Loring left her. The Wednesday the world thinks of as the original is actually the third act of a character who spent her first 27 years being surprisingly cheerful about, well, everything. Number 3, Uncle Fester built his own character after getting rejected. Now, Jackie Coogan's first audition for Uncle Fester did not go well. Producers looked at him and decided that he wasn't quite strange enough for the role, which, look, given the competition, that was a genuinely discouraging note to receive. Coogan went home and took matters into his own hands. He shaved his head, his eyebrows. He built the entire look himself from the ground up, working directly from the original Charles Addams cartoons with no input from the costume department. The other actors who auditioned had shown up with bald caps and waxed brows, a safe, reversible version of commitment. Coogan just actually did it. Then he sat down at the mirror to do his makeup, and his wife watched the whole transformation and started crying. And then he went back to the audition. He walked in completely transformed and radiating the specific energy of someone who hadn't had a normal day since the Eisenhower administration. Producers had no notes. There was nothing left to say. The character was standing right in front of them. The man who got told he wasn't weird enough had created the entire visual identity of the character himself. He came back on his own terms and walked out with the role. Number 2, the show became so popular, it got banned. Now, after the Addams Family became a hit, The New Yorker, the magazine that had been running Charles Addams cartoons since the 30s, looked at what was now airing on ABC and made a decision. They wanted nothing to do with it. Editor William Shawn banned any further Addams Family content from the magazine's pages. The reason wasn't just about popularity. It was about class. Shawn saw a network sitcom as low art, and The New Yorker had no interest in being associated with characters who could now be seen on television by just anybody. Of course not. Now, the magazine that had quietly championed this strange family for decades drew a very firm line the moment that family got their own theme song. The ban lasted 23 years. Addams just kept publishing in The New Yorker throughout. Same artist, same sensibility, same pages, just not those characters. Now, he did find ways around it. He quietly slipped the family into the background of other strips. A 1979 Subway cartoon features Uncle Fester and Grandmama riding the train, if you know where to look. Addams eventually grew bitter about the whole thing and privately described the magazine as having disowned his family. The ban was finally lifted in 1987 after Shawn stepped down. The family returned to the pages that launched them, and Charles Addams died the following year. The Addams Family spent their entire existence being too strange for normal people and too popular for sophisticated ones. They never quite fit anywhere, which is actually pretty on brand. Number 1, Morticia's effortless glide had a very uncomfortable explanation. Carolyn Jones made Morticia look completely effortless, gliding through every scene, unhurried, like she'd simply arrived on Earth that way. But the reality was considerably less effortless. Every morning before cameras rolled, Jones started with the wig. That signature jet black hair was a full hairpiece, carefully dressed from scratch each day. And then came makeup, the same wild color palette that we talked about earlier, which looked like abstract art in person and gothic perfection on your TV. That alone was a solid chunk of the morning just gone. And then came the dress, and that is where the real commitment kicked in. The gown was a hobble dress, skin-tight, form-fitting, and designed specifically to restrict movement. Once Jones was in it, the wardrobe department had effectively made every decision for her. Small, controlled steps. Not because it looked elegant, but because the dress left her with no other option. The costume team eventually had to sew Velcro into the back just so she could move around between takes. And at the end of each filming day, it took roughly 20 minutes just to peel it off. That smooth, almost supernatural glide that Morticia had across every room that she entered, that wasn't a character choice. It was a wardrobe department's way of saying that the matter was no longer up for discussion. And there you have it, everyone. 15 weird and wild facts about the Addams Family. Drop a comment with a fact that surprised you the most, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. And until next time, this is Remember When.